My 3-year-old daughter had been suffering from a very high fever, and as I was going to the kitchen to find the medicine that the doctor had prescribed her in the fridge, I heard heavy footsteps coming from the corridor. They seemed to be approaching one of the rooms in the corridor directly behind me. I grabbed the medicine and hurried back, only to find my daughter's foot protruding from the doorway of the bathroom. At that instant, I heard running water hitting metal, and my ears told me my husband was filling a bucket up with water. My body was moving long before I could even think about what was going on. "What are you doing?"
You're overreacting. This ought to bring down that stupid fever of hers.
I couldn't believe my ears when I heard these words from him, and just as I was about to pick her up from the bathroom floor, he turned on the shower, and ice-cold water shot all over the both of us. He then grabbed the bucket and strode towards the dining room, where dinner was waiting. My daughter's condition was slowly worsening until I realized. This is the story of how my husband's habit of being competitive in everything eventually turned him into a criminal, and how I was able to protect my daughter from his influence. My name is Morgan, and I'm a 29-year-old housewife who works part-time as a waitress in a locally popular cafe. I've been married for 5 years to my husband, Keegan, who's 2 years older than me, and worked as an ordinary office worker. We used to live together with our 3-year-old daughter, Victoria, better known as Vicky, who is in her first year of kindergarten. Vicky is a little slow-paced, by which I mean her growth and development are slow compared to the average. This could make any parent a little concerned about whether everything's okay or not, and I was no exception. I consulted trained pediatricians and nurses, and they all said pretty much unanimously that there was no cause for alarm, and it was nothing more than a common case of slight delay in development. Feeling reassured, I was willing to watch Vicky grow. However, Keegan seemed to be getting impatient with our daughter's pace. The fact that he perceived it to be only him concerned about her situation didn't help him, as it made him pretty stressed and needlessly worried. The most probable reason is that his sister, my sister-in-law Dahlia, who also has a 3-year-old son, bore her child a mere 6 months earlier than we had ours. Our nephew Joshua is an intelligent darling, and I think Keegan felt strongly that Vicky should have been born in the same way. When I reported to him that our daughter was standing up on her own, he said to me,
Joshua was already walking on his first birthday, Morgan. And Vicky can, stand on her hunches at this time of her life?
Needless to say, he took every accomplishment that Vicky ever went through in a negative way, comparing it to how Joshua was growing, and implying he was disappointed with how slowly she was developing. I was overjoyed to see that Vicky had finally started to speak 2-word sentences after turning 2 years old, but it was always the same from Keegan. Joshua could say something like, "Give me some bread, please," by the time he was 2.5 years old. They say girls talk faster than boys, but you're really slow at everything, aren't you? It was so depressing to see him take all the fun and celebratory spirit out of her accomplishment as he compared her to Joshua. I don't remember he and I ever being happy together about our daughter's growth because he was always like this. I don't think my parents-in-law, or Dahlia for that matter, would say anything to me about how slow my daughter's growth was. When my in-laws came to my daughter's 3rd birthday party to congratulate her, even during such a momentous celebration, Keegan only said,
Compared to Joshua, Vicky is...
and so on and so forth. This was evidently met with some backlash from his parents. "Keegan, son, Victoria may admittedly be a little slow compared to other kids, but that doesn't mean you need to compare her with Joshua in any way at all. For example, she was the first to memorize the picture book she liked."
What does it matter if she learned the contents of the books? She only memorized it because Morgan here had to read it to her over and over again.
No, we think Vicky's memory is amazing.
Vicky is not athletic and can't even ride a tricycle yet. And at this pace, I'm only going to be the target of Delilah's bragging again. I'm so sick of being told that my daughter is less of a prodigy than Joshua. Keegan, my boy, when did Delilah ever say anything that made it look like she was trying to say her son was better than your daughter? She just talked about what Joshua could do now that he's growing too. Even if that's the case, I don't want to lose to Delilah. That's happening far too often now.
After saying this, Keegan left the house in a huff.
I'm so sorry for my son being as such, Morgan, dear.
Oh no, sir, there's no need.
Ever since he was a child, Keegan has been compared to Delilah, who was quickly seen to be as quite a manly woman by our parents, their grandparents essentially. That may be the cause of his inferiority complex towards her, and why he seems to be pretty competitive with how his child is growing in contrast to his sisters.
We're very sorry to have caused you some unpleasant trouble when this had absolutely nothing to do with you. And we'll talk to him again. We're very sorry, dear. My husband's inferiority complex toward his sister already seemed abnormal. Even if he was reflecting his own inferiority complex upon his daughter because of incidents in the past, I don't think it's right to do to her what he has done to make her feel bad. I will talk to Keegan myself, but I would appreciate it if you guys would talk to him as well. Maybe help him see sense? After that, I repeatedly told my husband that there was no point in comparing children's growth with each other, as they were subjective, individual differences, and that I wanted him to respect my daughter for who she was growing as a child. But then he started buying books on childcare and started looking for something definitely wrong with Vicky.
This book says that a 3-year-old is capable of changing her clothes all by herself.
Read it more carefully, Keegan. It says here that some children can become able to change their own clothes by themselves by the time they're 3 years old. It doesn't say that all children can change their clothes at that age. I'm pretty sure I couldn't, and dare I be so bold, neither could you, maybe.
If she can't eat her food without spilling it, something's just not right.
Everything said in the book is nothing more than guidelines. Besides, not all of them are applicable to Vicky. For example, here it says that 3-year-olds are very self-assertive and can't give up their toys to their friends without putting a bit of a skirmish. But we both know that's not true for Vicky.
That's just because she's not very strong-willed. She's weak, is what she is.
Even if that's the case, don't you think that it's unfair that you don't even try to see the good things about her that are unfolding right in front of you? She may be doing so at an admittedly slower pace than other kids, but she is definitely growing, and you can't deny that.
But the other kids at her kindergarten do more than what she can do. You can't deny she's developing way too slowly.
This again? I really want you to stop comparing Vicky to other people of her age. I know, I really shouldn't get emotional in instances like these, but these discussions always end up as an argument, mostly because Keegan was adamant about how Vicky was just not good enough compared to other children. I tried to talk calmly with him after our daughter went to bed, but it was always the same conclusion, and I often ended up raising my voice. Because of this family environment and her daddy blaming her every day as a cause of our arguments, Vicky started crying just at the sight of my husband. She also began to develop the strange habit of biting her nails. It was when I saw that she was biting them so hard that her fingertips were bleeding that I realized that if she continued to live with her daddy in this way, it would not be good for her at all in terms of mental growth. I then decided to take her back to my parents' house for some time, which would also be used as a period of cooling down on both my end and Keegan's. I was sorry that she couldn't get much time to play with her friends anymore because we had to come home, which was a half-hour drive away, right after kindergarten. But it was better than staying at home with all the fighting. During the first week, my husband was angry, telling me to come home that very day. But as the days went by, he started to change his attitude towards the situation. A month after we started living separately, Keegan contacted me with the intention to talk things over on the weekend. When he showed up for the talk, he looked like he hadn't been sleeping very well, and his solemn expression and despondent nods of his head suggested he was really repenting his unreasonable actions.
I'm sorry, Morgan. I was wrong to do and say everything, and I promise I won't compare Vicky to anyone again. Nor will I blame her. You were right. It might be comparatively slow, but I can't deny that she's grown so much anyway. And I'm so proud of her for getting so big and so strong. I want you both to come back.
He even got down on his knees and placed his forehead against the floor. While at first glance, this change in his attitude was a good thing, the fact remained, I was still a little confused. I wondered if people could genuinely change that quickly in such a short time. Mommy? Daddy's crying. Let's go home. I guess my daughter had been putting up with my decision for the past month too. When I heard that she was desperately telling her friends at kindergarten that she wanted to play with them, I felt pity for her, and I decided to go home for her sake. However, although I returned home, she was still frightened of her father. Every time she did anything at all, I could see her looking at his face, trying to do everything perfectly so that he wouldn't do or say anything that showed even the slightest suggestion of disapproval. On top of that, once she started biting her nails, a habit that was hard to break, so I started to distract her whenever she brought her fingers to her mouth by calling out to her to do something for me, or to do something fun together. While I thought this would help our family life together, Keegan had found something else to be mad about: my interactions with Vicky. And by that, I mean that her behavior when she was with me was a lot more easygoing and joyful, while she was a lot more pensive and reserved whenever she spent time with him. I think he eventually got jealous of this difference and wanted her to be happy and energetic self whenever she was with him. But what with the expectations he had for her, regardless of whether they were no longer valid, how could she? One day, Vicky developed a fever and fell asleep on the couch. Besides the fever, she seemed to have no appetite and was very lethargic, so we decided to take her to the hospital. The doctor said it was probably nothing but a cold, and we were to keep her warm until the fever broke. However, her fever was indeed a little high, so she was prescribed with antipyretics, medicine to reduce the fever, and suppositories. After returning home, I spent my time warming her up with a little sweater and blankets, and humidifying the room as the doctor had suggested, and checked frequently for signs of dehydration. "Mommy?" "I'm here, darling." I held my daughter's cold hand whenever she called for me, and she immediately seemed relieved and fell back asleep. In the evening, Keegan came home from work. "Hey, honey, Vicky has a cold and a high fever. She's sleeping now, so could you just watch her while I prepare dinner?"
What the hell? What if I catch a cold? You're an adult. You can run your own business.
"Just stay with her until dinner is ready, please." He grumbled something and went into the room where Vicky was sleeping. An hour or so later, when dinner was ready, I went to call him, and he threw away the magazine he was reading as if he was really just watching her and not really being there for her. There's a difference between the two, at least by my perspective on things. In this situation, watching someone is to keep track of their physical well-being, while being there for someone included that along with mental and moral support with a kind tone and encouraging words.
So now dinner's finally ready? I'm so tired when I get home, and I hate it when dinner's late. For real.
I made it at the same time as usual, didn't I?
Yeah. You did.
My husband walked towards the dining room with an annoyed look on his face. Disgusted by my husband's attitude, I checked in on Vicky and found her shivering under the covers despite being kept warm. I took her temperature and found that it was over 40 degrees Celsius. She said in a barely audible voice, "Mommy, I'm cold." Her voice sounded more like a squeak than anything else, and her hands were frozen to the touch. I glanced at my husband's back and called out to him, "I'll go get her some medicine. Could you watch her another minute?" I said to him, and he came back looking annoyed.
What the hell? She's fine on her own for a little while.
Look, a little child like Vicky can get dehydrated so fast, and now she's running a fever of over 40 degrees right now. My husband reluctantly sat down beside her, and I headed for the kitchen. I was going to the kitchen to find the medicine that the doctor had prescribed her in the fridge when I heard heavy footsteps coming from the corridor. They seemed to be approaching one of the rooms directly behind me. I grabbed the medicine and hurried back, only to find Vicky's foot protruding from the doorway of the bathroom. At that instant, I heard running water hitting metal, and my ears told me my husband was filling a bucket up with water. My body was moving long before I could even think about what was going on. And there was Keegan with a bucket and Vicky lying on the floor soaking wet. "What the?" My voice sounded terrified, and I felt my blood rush away from my face. At the same time, I saw my breath condense in the frigid air. In the cold bathroom, Keegan was now pointing the shower towards my daughter and trying to turn on the faucet of the cold water. The cold water came shooting out upon me as soon as I was on top of her, trying my best to protect her from the onslaught. My clothes soaked up the cold water and cooled me down very quickly. Underneath me, my daughter was shivering and trembling, and her breathing was very labored. "What are you doing?"
You're overreacting. This ought to bring down that stupid fever of hers.
Keegan grabbed the bucket and went towards the dining room, where dinner was still waiting. I couldn't understand what he had just said, because all of my focus was on the fact that I had to wipe off my daughter's body now. I quickly reached for the bath towel and wrapped her in it. In my arms, her trembling grew more and more severe. "Vicky! Vicky, are you okay? Victoria!" She did not respond to my calls. Her eyes remained fixed on a single point, unresponsive. I realized she was having a seizure and that she was now unconscious. My daughter had been convulsing for about 10 minutes, and her trembling still hadn't stopped. That's when I pulled my phone out of my pocket and called an ambulance. I was monitoring her, trying to keep her soaked clothes warm with multiple blankets, and I made sure she was in the recovery position so she wouldn't choke if and when she vomited, and to keep her shallow breathing as unlabored as possible. The ambulance arrived perhaps a couple of minutes later, and we quickly got inside, still soaking wet. Keegan stared on in surprise as the ambulance arrived, but when his eyes met mine, he dropped his gaze and went into his room. We arrived at the emergency room, and doctors confirmed my daughter was having febrile convulsions. All I knew about how to deal with these was what I learned from the internet, but I guess I wasn't wrong in what I did. The paramedics and doctors praised me for my quick thinking and appropriate response to the problem. While I was at the hospital, my in-laws and Dahlia came rushing, breathless, to the hospital to talk about the progress of her condition. "What happened, Morgan? My dear?"
Where is Keegan? What is he doing now?
"Both of you? Wait a second. Morgan, honey, what in the world happened to your clothes? Why are you soaking wet?" The three of them were speechless when they saw me still dripping everywhere. When I told them about the events leading up to Vicky being rushed to the emergency room, they understood everything, including why Keegan wasn't here. The doctor had his diagnosis right then, and we all agreed to keep an eye on my daughter for a while. While a febrile seizure typically wouldn't require hospitalization, because she had a complex type of seizure that could leave her with a form of epilepsy, keeping her under observation was definitely necessary. As I was filling out the paperwork for her hospitalization, Miss Camille said to me, "Morgan, dear, you get back home and get yourself dressed for now. You need to bring some things for Vicky's hospitalization too, don't you?" She did have a point, so with the doctor's approval, I got into Dahlia's car and went home. When I opened the front door and took off my shoes, I saw my husband lying on the sofa in the living room with a thermometer in his hand.
What? Now you come home?
"How can you say that? Victoria was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance, Keegan."
Even Sis is here with you? Morgan? Did you call my parents? What the hell? Woman, don't you get your parents involved in any trouble.
"You're the one who..."
More importantly, I think I caught her cold, too. I want to take some medicine, so get me some water, please.
Dahlia continued to try to yell at her brother, but I stopped her and poured a glass full of water and offered it to him.
Oh, thank you.
But the next instant, I splashed the water all over his face.
What the frick was that for?
"You poured an entire bucket of ice-cold water on our daughter, who had a fever far worse than yours, and you're going to raise a fuss over a glass of water?"
Huh?
"Oh, I'm sorry. Where is my common sense? If someone has a fever, I should offer you an ice bath. Or did you want a bucket poured over your head? How about a cold shower instead? I'll cool you down any way you want."
That's not gonna bring the fever down.
"Oh, you're right. If a splash of water would bring down a fever, there'd be no need for a doctor now, would there? But you did it to a 3-year-old girl, you know. Do you have any idea what you did?"
It's just that I was there for her while you were going to get her stupid medicine. And all she did was say, "Mommy, Mommy." I was mad that she didn't want me to take care of her.
Don't you dare say it's just that, whatever the frick excuse you have. Considering all the expectations you claim you once had for her, it's no wonder she can't be herself when she's with you, Keegan.
I've reflected on it, and I've been there for her, haven't I?
If there's one thing I know about you, Keegan, it's that while you may act like you think one way, Something in your expression tells people you think the exact opposite. Perhaps even Vicky noticed that these past few weeks.
You know, I have a bunch of things to say to you too, Morgan. Vicky biting her nails is disgraceful and should be stopped as soon as possible. But you need to educate her more strictly. How's she gonna grow up without any bad habits that'll make her seem weird?
It's the result of the stress she had putting up with your bullshit that led to her biting her nails. And what's disgraceful is that you refuse to even acknowledge that as an option.
Nevertheless, it's a disgusting habit. You need to correct it as soon as possible.
Oh, and how about getting upset when you don't get your way, Don't you think it's more disgraceful for a parent to pour a bucket of water on their child who is suffering from a high fever than to have a comparatively harmless habit like that?
That bucket of water was overkill. I admit it. I was wrong to do that. I'm sorry.
Wrong? Sorry? Those words mean absolutely nothing to me coming from you. I knew you wouldn't change. It was a mistake to come back home when you asked us to. I should have just went on with our life with Mom and Dad. I said to him with the most malicious tone possible, and he fell silent. The hospital said they're going to call the police, so be prepared. I will never forgive you, and I will make sure we'll never have anything to do with the likes of your scum again, for the sake of Victoria. I left him in the living room hanging his head, got dressed, packed Vicky's things in my bag, and left the house. Keegan was later arrested for assault because his actions of pouring water on a sick 3-year-old child were considered malicious. Of course, I didn't withdraw the victim report. The court sentenced him to a year in prison. He claimed that I was also guilty of assault when I splashed a glass of water on him, but his report was denied. However, the police did warn me that even splashing a glass of water could be considered an assault in specific scenarios, so I will keep that in mind. Despite this, he insisted for a while that he did not want a divorce. This, along with the fact that he was in prison, made the process of divorce not easy. But after several court hearings, it was finally finalized 2 years later. He subsequently lost his job because of being given a sentence in prison, and his parents, along with Dahlia's family, severed their familial ties with him as well. He once asked me how Vicky was doing, but even if he really did care about her properly, like her father, I wouldn't tell him how she was doing, and nothing was going to make me. In the 2 years since the incident, I have tried to watch her grow at her own pace. Since then, Victoria, who is now in elementary school, caught up with everyone else very quickly, and is now able to do as many things as everyone else her age. Since leaving my husband, she has been able to live a more easygoing life free of stress, and her smiles have increased in frequency and brightness. Her nail biting habit also seems to be gradually fading away, as she's able to make the act of bringing her hand towards her mouth the beginning of something else to distract her. Her current condition nowadays gives me courage, and I vow I will continue to do my best to give her the best life possible. Wish us luck.